Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about the ongoing war in Ukraine and the potential impact of the presidential election in the USA. Now, recently, Joe Biden and Donald Trump held a live TV debate for 90 minutes. And if you've watched one of these things, you'll know that 90 minutes is quite a long time to be sitting listening to two presidential candidates. However, this debate was particularly interesting because they covered a variety of different topics, including the war in Ukraine. And as part of that debate, Donald Trump actually came out and said that if he's successful and he gets elected as president, he will end this war during 2024, before he takes office in January 2025, which is obviously a very bold statement. And I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that that wasn't the only thing that Donald Trump said about the war in Ukraine. And he actually blames Joe Biden for it starting in the first place. He says that if he was president, it never would have started. So in today's video, I'm going to go through some of the highlights of that debate and pick out some of the issues that I think are really important. So I'll have a look at what Donald Trump said in terms of why this war started and why it wouldn't have started if he was president. We'll also have a look at his statement with regards to how he's going to end the war. We'll hear Joe Biden's opinion of President Putin and whether or not there's any likelihood of this conflict developing into World War III. We'll then talk about a very sensitive issue, the age of these two candidates, because Donald Trump is currently 78 and Joe Biden is 81. And by the end of the next presidential term, Donald Trump will be 82 and Joe Biden 86. And we'll also pick up on some issues that came out during the debate, specifically about Joe Biden, where he lost his train of thought and tailed off. And there are some very worrying signs there that either he can't concentrate for 90 minutes or he's got some underlying issues which may be a major problem in terms of taking over for another 4 years. And then finally today, I'll wrap up with my summary as to what I think is likely to happen over the course of the next 6 months, because this presidential election campaign has got a long way to run. The actual vote isn't until November, so these guys are going to be even older by the time that vote comes round. And what I think the implications will be in terms of the war in Ukraine. But before we get started on all of that, I'd like to say once again, thank you so much to everyone that's supporting the channel. Really do mean this. If you've bought me a coffee recently, thank you for that. I know it takes a bit of time and effort to go over to that website and do it. I really appreciate that generosity. And the same if you've bought me a YouTube super thanks. Thank you for taking the time to do that. And if you've signed up as a long-term supporter, either through Patreon, where you can get early access to my videos and watch them advert-free, or YouTube membership, where you'll also get early access, or buy me a coffee membership, I really appreciate that long-term support. It helps keep me motivated, it tells me I'm doing something right, and makes me post videos as often as I can. So thank you so much. So let's start off by hearing from Donald Trump as to why he thinks the war in Ukraine started and why it wouldn't have actually taken place if he'd have remained as president. And then we'll hear Joe Biden's response to that.
Russia, they took a lot of land from Bush. They took a lot of land from Obama and Biden. They took no land, nothing from Trump, nothing. He knew not to do it. He's not going to play games with me. He knew that. I got along with him very well, but he knew not to play games. He took nothing from me. But now he's going to take the whole thing from this man right here. That's a war that should have never started. It would have never started ever with me. And he's going to take Ukraine. And, you know, you asked me a question before, would you do this? He's got us in such a bad position right now with Ukraine and Russia, because Ukraine's not winning that war. He said, I will never settle until such time. They're running out of people. They're running out of soldiers. They've lost so many people. It's so sad. They've lost so many people, and they've lost those gorgeous cities with the golden domes that are 1,000 years old, all because of him and stupid decisions. Russia would have never attacked.
President Trump, Vladimir Putin says he'll only end this war if Russia keeps the Ukrainian territory it has already claimed and Ukraine abandons its bid to join NATO. Are Putin's terms acceptable to you?
First of all, our veterans and our soldiers can't stand this guy. They can't stand him. They think he's the worst commander-in-chief, if that's what you call him. that we've ever had. They can't stand him. So let's get that straight. And they like me more than just about any of them. And that's based on every single bit of information. As far as Russia and Ukraine, if we had a real president, the president that knew, that was respected by Putin, he would have never invaded Ukraine. A lot of people are dead right now, much more than people know. You know, they talk about numbers. You can double those numbers, maybe triple those numbers. He did nothing to stop it. In fact, I think he encouraged Russia from going in. I'll tell you what happened. He was so bad with Afghanistan. It was such a horrible embarrassment, most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, that when Putin watched that and he saw the incompetence, that he should have fired those generals, like I fired the one that you mentioned. And so he's got no love lost, but he should have fired those generals. No general got fired for the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, Afghanistan, where we left billions of dollars of equipment behind. We lost 13 beautiful soldiers, and 38 soldiers were obliterated. And by the way, we left people behind, too. We left American citizens behind. When Putin saw that, he said, you know what? I think we're going to go in and maybe take this was his dream. I talked to him about it, his dream. The difference is he never would have invaded Ukraine, never. Just like Israel would have never been invaded in a million years by Hamas. You know why? Because Iran was broke with me. I wouldn't let anybody do business with them. They ran out of money. They were broke. They had no money for Hamas. They had no money for anything. No money for terror. That's why you had no terror at all during my administration. This place, the whole world is blowing up under him.
President Biden?
I've never heard so much malarkey in my whole life. Look, the fact of the matter is that we're in a situation where, let's take the last point first. Iran attacked American troops, caused brain damage for a number of these troops, and he did nothing about it. Recently, not when he was president. They attacked. He said they're just having headaches. That's all it is. He didn't do a thing when the attack took place, number one. Number two, we got over 100,000 Americans and others out of Afghanistan during that airlift. Number three, we found ourselves in a situation where, if you take a look at what Trump did in Ukraine, this guy told Trump, do whatever you want, and do whatever you want. And that's exactly what Trump did to Putin, encourage him, do whatever you want. And he went in. And listen to what he said when he went in. He was going to take Kyiv in 5 days, remember? Because it's part of the old Soviet Union. That's what he wanted to reestablish, Kyiv. And he, in fact, didn't do it at all. He wasn't able to get it done. And they've lost thousands and thousands of troops, 500,000 troops.
Now, I think one of the most controversial things that came out of this debate is Donald Trump stating that he believes that he can bring the war in Ukraine to an end during 2024. So let's hear exactly what he had to say.
Are Putin's terms acceptable to you? Keeping the territory in Ukraine?
No, they're not acceptable. But look, this is a war that never should have started. If we had a leader in this war, he led everybody along. He's given $200 billion now or more to Ukraine. He's given $200 billion. That's a lot of money. I don't think there's ever been anything like it. Every time that Zelensky comes to this country, he walks away with $60 billion. He's the greatest salesman ever. And I'm not knocking him. I'm not knocking anything. I'm only saying the money that we're spending on this war, and we shouldn't be spending, it should have never happened. I will have that war settled between Putin and Zelensky as president-elect before I take office on January 20th. I'll have that war settled. People being killed so needlessly, so stupidly, and I will get it settled, and I'll get it settled fast before I take office.
Let's hear what Joe Biden has to say about Vladimir Putin of Russia.
The fact is that Putin is a war criminal. He's killed thousands and thousands of people. And he has made one thing clear. He wants to reestablish what was part of the Soviet Empire, not just a piece. He wants all of Ukraine. That's what he wants. And then you think he'll stop there? Do you think he'll stop when if he takes Ukraine? What do you think happens to Poland? What do you think of Belarus? What do you think happens to those NATO countries? And so if you want a war, you ought to find out what he's going to do, because if in fact he does what he says and walks away, and by the way, all that money we give Ukraine are from weapons we make here in the United States. We give them the weapons, not the money at this point. And our NATO allies have produced as much funding for Ukraine as we have. That's why we're strong.
So let's hear why Donald Trump believes that the world is now closer to World War III than it's ever been, and what Joe Biden's response was.
We're a failing nation right now. We're a seriously failing nation. And we're a failing nation because of him. His policies are so bad. His military policies are insane. They're insane. These are wars that will never end with him. He will drive us into World War III, and we're closer to World War III than anybody can imagine. We are very, very close to World War III, and he's driving us there. And Kim Jong-un and President Xi of China, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, all of these, Putin, they don't respect him. They don't fear him. They have nothing going with this gentleman, and he's going to drive us into World War III.
You want a World War III, let him follow and win, and let Putin say, do what you want, NATO. Just do what you want. There's a thing called Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all, and required response. The idea, I can't think of a single major leader in the world who wouldn't trade places with the job I've done and what they've done. Because we are a powerful nation. We have wonderful people. It's because of the people, not me. It's because of the American people. They're capable of anything, and they step up when they're needed. And right now, we're needed. We're needed to protect the world because our own safety is at stake. And again, you want to have a war, just let Putin go ahead and take Kyiv, make sure they move on, see what happens in Poland, Hungary, and other places along that border. Then you have a war.
One of the main concerns over these two candidates running for the presidency is that both of them will be the oldest president ever elected. 78 and 81 will be a record-breaking age, and that's causing concern because you then have to sit in office for another 4 years. So let's hear what they had to say on this matter.
President Biden, you would be 86 at the end of your second term. How do you address concerns about your capability to handle the toughest job in the world well into your 80s?
Well, first of all, I spent half my career being criticized being the youngest person in politics. I was the second youngest person ever elected to the United States Senate, and now I'm the oldest. This guy's 3 years younger and a lot less competent. I think that just look at the record. Look at what I've done. Look how I've turned around the horrible situation he left me.
Former President Trump, to follow up, you would be 82 at the end of your second term. What do you say to voters who have concerns about your capabilities to serve?
Well, I took 2 tests, cognitive tests. I aced them, both of them, as you know. We made it public. He took none. I'd like to see him take one, just one, a real easy one. Like go through the first 5 questions. He couldn't do it. But I took 2 cognitive tests. I took physical exams every year. And, you know, we knock on wood wherever we may have wood, that I'm in very good health. I just won 2 club championships, not even senior, 2 regular club championships. To do that, you have to be quite smart, and you have to be able to hit the ball a long way, and I do it. He doesn't do it. He can't hit a ball 50 yards. He challenged me to a golf match. He can't hit a ball 50 yards. I think I'm in very good shape. I feel that I'm as in good a shape as I was 25, 30 years ago. Actually, I'm probably a little bit lighter, but I'm in as good a shape as I was years ago. I feel very good. I feel the same. But I was willing to take a cognitive test, and you know what? If I didn't do well, I aced him. Dr. Ronnie Jackson, who's a great guy when he was White House doctor. And then I took another one, a similar one. And one of them said they've never seen anybody ace him.
Thank you. President Biden?
You can see he is 6'5" and only 223 pounds, or 235 pounds. Well, you said 6'4", 200. Well, anyway, that's what anyway, just take a look at what he says he is and take a look at what he is. Look, I'd be happy to have a driving contest with him. I got my handicap, which when I was vice president, down to a 6. But by the way, I told you before, I'm happy to play golf if you carry your own bag. Think you can do it?
That's the biggest lie. That he's a 6 handicap of all.
I was an 8 handicap.
Yeah.
8.
Never.
But I have, you know how many?
I've seen you swing. I know you swing.
Okay, let's not act like children. President Trump, we're going to turn.
Let's not act like children.
To a specific.
Over the past few months, there have been rising concerns about Joe Biden losing his train of thought, forgetting words, and appearing to have senior moments. And during this debate, he had a couple of those. And the worst of them was when he was asked about the national debt. So listen to the end of this statement when he loses his train of thought completely and actually starts talking about Medicare.
President Biden, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to this question about the national debt.
He had the largest national debt of any president in a 4-year period, number one. Number two, that $2 trillion tax cut benefited the very wealthy. What I'm going to do is fix the tax system. For example, we have 1,000 trillionaires in America. Billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they, in fact, pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24%, 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 billion, I should say, in a 10-year period. We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death, and he's destroying Medicare.
One of the other major controversies in this presidential election is that Donald Trump has been appearing in court, charged with various criminal offences. And Joe Biden wasn't going to let the opportunity pass of bringing this up. So let's hear what he had to say on the matter.
The crimes that you are still charged with, and think of all the civil penalties you have. How many billions of dollars do you owe in civil penalties for molesting a woman in public, for doing a whole range of things, of having sex with a porn star on the night while your wife was pregnant? I mean, what are you talking about? You have the morals of an alley cat.
Give you a minute, sir.
I didn't have sex with a porn star, number one. Number two, that was a case that was started and moved. They moved a high-ranking official, a DOJ, into the Manhattan DA's office to start that case. That case is going to be appealed and won. We had a very terrible judge, a horrible judge, Democrat. The prosecutor were all high-ranking Democrats, appointed people, and both the civil and the criminal. He basically went after his political opponent because he thought it was going to damage me. But when the public found out about these cases, because they understand it better than he does, he has no idea what these cases are. But when they found out about these cases, you know what they did? My poll numbers went up, way up. You know that because you're reporting it. And we took in more money in the last 2 weeks than we've ever taken in the history of any campaign. I don't think any campaign has ever taken. Hundreds of millions of dollars came pouring in because the public knows it's a scam. And it's a guy that's after his political opponent because he can't win fair and square.
Another hot topic in terms of this presidential election is immigration. If you remember back to the time when Donald Trump was previously elected as president, he said that he was going to build a wall between the USA and Mexico. Now, he didn't actually complete that wall, but that was one of the things in his original manifesto. And he remains focused on stopping immigration. And he says that Joe Biden has been too relaxed. Now, one of the things about this part of the debate is that Joe Biden once again lost his train of thought towards the end of his statement. So listen to what he says. It becomes a little bit embarrassing.
President Biden, a record number of migrants have illegally crossed the southern border on your watch, overwhelming border states and overburdening cities such as New York and Chicago, and in some cases causing real safety and security concerns. Given that, why should voters trust you to solve this crisis?
Because we worked very hard to get a bipartisan agreement that not only changed all of that, made sure that we are in a situation where you had no circumstance where they could come across the border with the number of border police there are now. We significantly increased the number of asylum officers. By the way, the Border Patrol endorsed my position. In addition to that, we found ourselves in a situation where when he was president, he was separating babies from their mothers, putting them in cages, making sure the families were separated. That's not the right way to go. What I've done since I've changed the law, what's happened? I've changed it in a way that now you're in a situation where there are 40% fewer people coming across the border illegally. That's better than when he left office. And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
Now, at the end of the debate, Joe Biden decided that he wanted to go over and talk to the two presenters. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to get off the stage himself, and he had to have his wife come up and assist him. And this raised further concerns about his mobility and his general all-round health. And this is now why people are becoming concerned as to whether or not Joe Biden is right to take on this job until he's 86 years old. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because what's going on with regards to the presidential election in the USA is going to have a huge impact on global politics, and particularly the war in Ukraine. As we've heard from both of the candidates, they have completely different views as to why this war started and how it's going to end. And as I said right at the beginning of this video, Donald Trump stated in the most recent debate that he will bring this war to an end before the end of 2024, before he takes office. Now, he hasn't gone into any specific detail as to how that's going to be achieved. And he was asked specifically during the debate whether or not he agreed with President Putin's proposal whereby Russia can keep what they're currently occupying and agree some form of peace settlement. And he said that he didn't agree with that proposal. So that would mean that he'd have to persuade President Putin to agree to some sort of backtracking. And as you'll know if you follow the channel, President Putin isn't known for his backtracking. When he says he's going to do something, he generally sticks to his guns and is very difficult to get him to change his mind. So we don't know exactly what Donald Trump has in mind in order to persuade Russia to bring the war to an end. But it might be that he's just making a glib statement, offering to do something that's actually going to be very difficult to deliver. But he said it. It's on record. It's as part of one of the biggest debates that has been on TV. So everybody knows that Trump now thinks that he can end the war. Now, President Biden hasn't said that that's going to happen. In fact, he's reiterated the situation whereby NATO will stand together. And if there's any form of involvement from Russia in any NATO countries, then obviously they would come down on Russia because they all stand together. So it doesn't look like there's going to be any end in sight to the war. If President Biden comes into power, it's likely that we'll have a continuation of the current situation whereby the USA is providing a large amount of aid to Ukraine to keep the war going. But it will be interesting to see what Donald Trump proposes if he does win the election. But I think the other big thing that came out of the debate are the concerns about Joe Biden's health. He stumbled through a couple of the questions and actually lost his train of thought and said things that nobody really understood. Now, it might be that he was just under pressure and his team said that he wasn't feeling very well. He had a cold. But the way that he was talking does raise major concerns. And if you've got any experience yourself of dementia, you'll know that when people do contract things like dementia or Alzheimer's, they suddenly start saying things that don't really fit with their character. They say they lose their train of thought, and similar things to what we saw from Joe Biden start happening to people. So I'm not saying that it is definitely happening. I'm obviously not an expert in these matters, but there are some major concerns. And one of the biggest concerns is that these two guys are running for an office that doesn't actually start until January 2025 and then will run for the next 4 years. So they're going to be almost 5 years older than they are right now by the end of that presidential term. So there's a big question mark as to whether or not either of them are fit for office. But it's going to be a really interesting few months as we run into the November election, because Joe Biden is now firmly in the spotlight. Everybody will be watching what he's doing, looking at how he's walking and his mobility, and most importantly, listening to what he's saying. And if he continues to have moments like he had in the most recent debate, there will be a question as to whether or not he is the right candidate for the Democratic Party, or whether or not somebody else might be lined up as his replacement. So as I said right at the start of today's video, I wanted to make this episode because I think what's happening in the USA is really important, particularly in relation to the war in Ukraine, and there will be completely different outcomes depending on who wins this election. If Joe Biden wins, then it's likely that we'll see a continuation of the current situation. However, if Donald Trump wins, and there is a real possibility that he will, then we could see a radical change in the USA's perspective, and if that happens, it could have major implications, not just for the war in Ukraine, but for the whole of Europe. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.